Now, I'm going to stream my screen as well. And just a reminder, as usual, I'm only recording the screen that I'm streaming, not the Discord and my microphone. So if you guys have questions that you want to use the chat or use your microphone, you will not be part of the recording. And of course, you're welcome to ask questions at any point. Um, and so yeah, today we're gonna just go over creating a little slideshow to use as your final project proposal. So instead of like going to Google Slides or PowerPoint or something like that and making a slideshow there, we're gonna go over how to make our own slideshow. And it's going to be a good chance for us to review a lot of the stuff that we've covered recently, but also in previous classes. Yeah, it's just a quick demo, and then you guys can work on creating a proposal for the final project. I kind of went over this at the end of the video from the last class, so I'm not going to spend as much time right now, but for the final project, let's look at those requirements real quick. So it's pretty straightforward. It just has to be a P5 sketch. There has to be some kind of user interaction, either through clicking on DOM elements or just interacting with the canvas. There should be at least one external file, so some image or some sound that gets used in the project. It has to use variables where appropriate, and it has to use at least one example of logic, like an if statement, and then either one of a loop or a function, custom function or loop. You can choose, or you can do both, of course. So the programming requirements are pretty straightforward. As far as the content, it's very open-ended. Most people take something that they've worked on in a previous class or previous assignment and elaborate on it and add to it. Some people create stuff that's completely different. So it's really up to you guys what you want to do and what you're inspired to do. For the proposal itself that we're going to work on today, we're just going to make a little sketch where you can click through slides. Um, and you can just explain in a few slides what you plan to do for the final project. So, how's the user going to interact with the sketch? What type of graphics will be used? Any other kind of information that you think is going to be useful. As I talked about last time, if you are not sure what you want to do for your final, there's a couple ways that you might look at some inspiration. So one is by looking at student work from previous semesters. I have fall 2022 and spring 2022, the link to our open labs for these semesters. So if you look, most people use the final project category. So you could actually click on the final project category and look through some of the previous final projects. This is from last semester. So you could see some stuff that people made, and if you think something looks cool, you could work on something similar. And they should have a link to their code as well, so you can always take a look at that. Similar thing, this is from 2 semesters ago, spring 2022. You can see some of the final projects from this semester. And then up until and before the pandemic, I kind of had a different setup for this class. And so for these, there's just like separate links, but you can click on the links and find examples of final projects of created by students from previous years. And it's a certain point, if you go back far enough, you'll see stuff that doesn't or actually, no, I think I took all that stuff out. So everything in here is P5 based, so it should all be pretty familiar. With these older projects, if they're like embedded on a page, you can always just, open up the developer tools and go to sources and just take a look at the code there. So you can see some code from, those previous projects if you want to take a look at that as well. So that's one place to look is previous student work. And then there's also a page of inspiration. These are just a lot of random projects that I think are cool. I should add probably more to this. A lot of these are probably more elaborate than something that you would want to create on your own, but you could get inspiration from some of these projects. Trying to see, let's see what this one looks like. Oh, this is some different typography experiments. So these are just different animations and letters associated, or designs associated with different letters. So that's pretty cool. So there's some different stuff like that that you guys could take a look at if you're not sure what you want to make. Oh, I see this is like a little, this is kind of fun. Anyway, just a couple things to take a look at if you're looking for inspiration. So let's go on to make our final project pitch. So I'm going to rename this P5 sketch final project pitch. And it's a good idea to do a little bit of planning before you get started. So I'm going to call this final project pitch. I'm going to just imagine a final project where I'm going to put some, using some, what we learned last week with the buttons. I'm going to use some circle buttons. So let's say I'm going to use circle buttons as the interaction. So I'll just plan out here. So interaction is circle buttons. And then when I click on the circle buttons, I'll play a sound and I'll show like, maybe I'll have the buttons look like frogs. And when I click on them, they will play frog sounds. So I'm not actually going to make this project in this demo. What I'm going to do is use this as an idea to create for the final project pitch. So it's really quite simple. You just have to kind of talk about what you want to make and what you give some visual example of what you plan for it to look like. The main thing that we're going to be doing with this sketch is going over how to show different information for different slides and then move between the different slides. So this is actually quite similar to a project that we did way back with in like let's see here, week 6, when we added conditional logic to our meme, and we could click through the different memes. We're basically just creating that project, but instead of clicking on the entire canvas, we're going to make buttons that you have to click on to move between the slides. So I'm going to start out with that. I'm just going to design the slides first, and then I'll add the buttons. So I'm going to make a variable to track my current slide. And I'll start this out at 1. And I'll just put a note here for the slide numbers. So slide 1 will be the title. Slide 2 will be the description. Slide 3 will be, oops. Slide 3 will be the interaction. And then slide 4 will be some graphics. So I'll show a little bit of what it's going to look like. Okay. So I just need to know the current slide. Right now, I don't need to actually add anything else here. I can go straight into my draw function and just draw my different slides. I'm going to set the canvas to a little bit larger. I'm going to say 600 by 500. Give myself a little more space. Or let's do even bigger. Let's do maybe 700 by 500. So I'll give myself a little more space for this presentation. And then I'm just going to get started. So I'm going to use some basic conditional logic to figure out which slide I'm on. And then depending on what slide I'm on, I'm going to draw different stuff in that slide. And so we're just going to start with the first slide, and then as we design the other slides, I'll just change that number so we draw the slide. So I'm going to say if current slide equals 1. So if the current slide is 1, this is what we're going to draw. And so this is my title slide. So I'm going to make up a name for my project and just put it in the canvas. So I'm going to say text. For my title, I'll call this frog clicker. And I'll put this in the middle of my canvas. So I'll put it at width divided by 2. And then I'll put it sort of towards the top. So there we've got, so let's design this text just a little bit. I'll say text size is 100. Okay, and let's do the text align is center, center. Okay, there we go. That looks pretty good. And let's make it green since we're talking about frogs. Okay, and then, you don't have to put much more information here. I might put like by Owen or something like that so people know who is presenting it. So I'll add some more text. I'll say by Owen. And I'll put this in the middle of the screen as well and just move it down a little bit. So I'll say like maybe 400 for the Y. And maybe I'll make it just a little bit smaller so it's not as big as the title. So I'll do 50. And let's move it up a little bit. Okay. So that's my first slide. That's the title slide. I'm using numbers here just because it's easier, but I could also use a string. I could say like if current slide equals title, but it's going to be a lot easier to use numbers when we decide to change the slides because we can just add or subtract from the number rather than figuring out which slide it is and which slide comes next and then changing the value. So that's my current slide number one. I'm gonna just go down here and say if current slide equals 2, and then I'll start designing my next slide. And I'm gonna change the slide number up here to 2. So now if I rerun that sketch, we get a blank canvas again. So we're gonna ignore current slide 1 for a little while. I could put a little comment here like title as well if I just wanna keep this nice and organized. So for my slide number 2, that's a description. I'm just going to start out with a text description. If it gets really long, you might want to put like a variable up here with your description. But since I'm not going to be using it anywhere else, I don't really need to do that. So I'm just going to say for my text description in my final project, there will be frogs on the canvas drawn with P5 shapes, and users can click the frog to play a ribbit sound. And then I need to give it an XY value. So yeah, when you have text this long, it looks a little weird. So let's put our description, because now we're just like reading all this text. It looks kind of goofy. So let's put this description here, and then we can just move this up to our global scope so we can get it out of the way. And now I can just put the description variable into my text argument. So that'll be a lot simpler. And then for the width or for the position, I'll do width over 2 again. I'll just keep this centered and I'll put this in the middle of the screen. So I'll say height over 2. And then you can see that my design for the text is not getting read up here because this if statement is not true. So let's move the fill and the text align and the text size. Let's move all of these down here so we can design our text, but that's way too big because our description is much longer than our title. So we're gonna have to make the text size smaller. Let's do like 20. But then we're also gonna have to shrink the text box. So I have width over 2 for the X position of the text, and I have height over 2 for the Y position of the text. So that puts it in the middle. But we need something to keep it inside the canvas. So I'm gonna say width first, and then I might wanna take a little bit away, and then it disappeared. Okay, let's turn this to 0 and see if it appears. No. Okay, let's turn this to 0. Okay, let's try that again. So if I put my description at 0, 0, okay, I can see it up there. Let's move it halfway down. Okay, and move it. Okay, so there, see it there. So, I don't know why let's try a different size. Let's try 200. Okay, for some reason when I'm adding the width, I'm getting an error here. Text align center requires X width. Oh, okay. So P5, they must have changed this because I've never seen this before. So it's telling me I need a width and a height. So let's say width of the canvas for the width, height of the canvas for the height. Okay, so now it looks kind of weird. So it looks like P5 has done some changes to how they do our text. So let's try resetting this to 0, 0. Okay, that looks better. So it looks like now if I want to center my text, instead of centering the XY, I can just set the width and the height, and that will kind of create the center of that box. So that's good to know. Let's see what happens if I say it's left aligned. Okay, so it still works fine. Okay, so that's good. So I think that it looks like they made a little update to how that width and height works for the text box, but I think ultimately that's probably a good update. Okay, I'm gonna make the text a little bit bigger because we have more space. And then I don't want it to go all the way to the edges, so I'm gonna say width minus 100. Okay, so now I'm gonna have to move it over. Do I want to do that? I guess I'll just move it over like half of that. Okay, that's not ideal, but that's fine. Okay, so that's my description. So the next part we have to do is the interaction. And I kind of already described the interaction, but I'm just going to describe it in more detail here. So I'm going to make another string and call this interaction. And I'll say uh, when the user clicks, okay, I'll just say the user will click on frog graphics with the mouse. And this is also kind of a good thing to set up like what you'll want to put for the instructions, because if you have an interaction, you need to have some instructions unless it's really obvious what the interaction is. So this is probably what the instructions on the project should say. Okay, so I have my interaction. This is slide number 3, so I'm going to change the slide to 3 here. And then this is very similar, so I'm just going to copy and paste this whole thing. And all I'm going to do is change interaction here in this note and down here as well. And then I have to, of course, change the slide number to 3. Okay, so there we go. We've got my user interaction. And let's draw a little mouse just to make that clear. So let's put a triangle at, let's see how if I can draw a triangle effectively. Let's put it at 300 by 300, and then 320 by 300, and then 300 and 320. Okay, close enough. Let's do no stroke. Let's move that over a little bit. So let's say 400, 420, 400. Okay, and let's draw a little line coming out of it. You don't really have to do this. I don't know why I'm doing this, but just for fun. So let's put a stroke, green, stroke weight is like 6 maybe. And let's go from 400, 300. So that's the top of the mouse to like 440, 340. Whoops. Let's put this no stroke up here as well. And then my line is a little too big, so let's move it down. And I guess I'll just move it in a little bit. Okay, that kind of looks like a mouse. That's good enough. All right, anyway, so let's go to the graphics. So here, if you're using images, you can show an image. This doesn't have to be the final version of the graphics, but just something to give us a sense of what the graphics will look like. So there has to be something visual, whether it's P5 shapes or images or whatever. I'm not going to use images since I'm using sound. I have my external file taken care of, but we just want to show some example of the graphics. So I'm going to put another description here for my graphics. I'm going to say variable graphics equals, I will use P5 shapes and colors to draw the frogs. And so part of this slide will actually be text, but then I'll also include some graphics. So for current slides 4, I'm going to copy this bit up here and just change this to graphics. But then, oh, I have to change my slide. So I have to go all the way back to the top and change my current slide to 4. Okay, so I'm going to move this up a little bit. So instead of height, or instead of 0, or no, okay, this is actually, text is a lot trickier now. So if I want it centered, I need to use this text align center center. Oh, you know what I can do is just change the height of the overall box, and that'll move it up. Okay, so that's pretty good. Let's just do like 150. Okay, so then I'm just going to draw some graphics under here. So I'm going to start with a circle. I already have fill green. So let's start with a circle. I'll put it at like 200, 300, and 100 pixels. And then I'll change the fill to maybe, what color eyes do frogs have? Like yellow, maybe? And I'll do a couple more little circles for the eyes. So let's do one over here. And let's move them up a little bit. Okay. And let's do a little pink tongue. So I'll say fill pink. Or let's do hot pink so it's a little brighter. And I'll put a rectangle. And we'll do it from the middle of the circle. So 200, 300, or let's move it down just a little bit, 320. And let's make it like 100 pixels wide and like 20 pixels tall. Okay, that's a little too tall. And let's put a little rounded edge on it. Okay, and let's move it over just a little bit. And we can put a little end on it. So let's put one more circle. It's got to be this X plus the width of the rectangle. So that's 310. Same Y, and maybe like 20. Oh, we got to move it down a little bit on Y. Nope, too far. 350. Oh, nope, 25. Okay, I've got my frog. If I wanted to draw a few of these, obviously I could put them in a function. That's probably what I'd be doing for the actual project, but for this is good enough. I've got my little frog character. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So that's how we're gonna, so that's the content. And so we're gonna describe the content in these different sections. So we have the graphics section for if current slide equals 4. We have the interaction, if current slide equals 3, and the description, and then the title. And these are all just like drawing different things. So everything that goes inside of there is just what I want to show up on those slides. Now I need to create the buttons to move between the slides. And this is a little bit trickier. We're gonna kind of review what we did last week. But essentially what I need to be able to do is I need to have like a circle or square, either one, in the corner or wherever I want to put it. I could put it over here, or maybe I just put it like right there. Maybe I'll do that since I'm using the frog circle. I'll put a circle right here with some arrows. And so if I click on this one, I'll move the slide forward. If I click on this one, I'll move the slide back. So I need to draw these, but I also need to know where these are. If I don't know where these are, then I won't be able to know if I'm clicking on them. So first I'm going to draw these. So I have to draw first, and then I have to look if I'm clicking on them. So there's a two-part process to anything that we're creating that's interactive like this. So I'm going to make a couple of variables to handle this. So uh, I'm going to have a next button. Okay, so let's put a comment here. These are my buttons. So I have a next button, and I need an X value for that. I think that's going to be something like 700 minus something. So let's say 650 for now. And then I also need a Y value, next button Y. And that's going to be like 500 minus something, so 550. And I'll probably have the buttons on the same line. So maybe I'll just have a button Y in general. So I'll just have a button Y, and then I'll have a next button, and I'll have a previous button. And I'll just put the previous button behind the next button. So basically what I'm saying so far is setting up where these buttons are going to be. So the next button is going to be, this is 700 minus 50. And I could do this using my width variables and stuff like that, but I'm just hard coding it for now. Um, so that's my next button is going to be here. And then the previous button, I'm just going to go back a little bit to here. So they'll be next to each other. And then they're going to be on the same Y. So that's why I have button Y equals 550. That might not be the right number, but we can change that later. But they have the same Y, so I don't need two Ys. If I had my buttons like this, then I would need two Ys, or if I had like one button over here for some reason. But since they're on the same Y, I just have one, and they'll have the same size as well. And I'm going to need to know all of that stuff to know if I'm clicking on the button. So I need all of these to be global variables. So for the button size, let's just say 50. We can change this later if we need to. Okay, so then to draw the buttons, so we're going to draw the buttons all the time, regardless of what slide we're on. So let's do that down here. So we're going to draw our buttons. And like we looked at a few weeks ago, if we have two things that are pretty much the same thing, we can make a custom function to draw them instead of repeating our code. So what I'm going to do is create a button function that takes an X and a Y and a size. And I'm just going to draw a circle at X, Y, and size. And then what I'll change is the fill. So I'm going to start out with the fill is green, but we'll update the fill in a second. Okay, so now we can draw our buttons. So I have two buttons. I have one which is at button next button X. So I'm just using these variables that I just created up here. So next button X, button Y, these are the same, so I could put them anywhere, but if I want to add more buttons in the future, it's better to kind of do it this way. And then for my button size, I'll put that. Why don't I see my buttons? Okay, did I get an error? No. All right, I'm going to finish doing this and then I'm going to debug. So then we have prev button X, button Y, button size. Okay, so let's see. Those numbers all exist. Let's set my current slide back to 1 for a second. Why don't these buttons show? Okay, what if I change this to circle? Nope. Okay, let's log our values. They're all there. Something weird is happening. Okay, let's just try drawing something. So I'll say fill is green, and I'll draw a circle at 550. Or what did I say? 650, 550. Oh, you know what? I think the Y, I made a dumb mistake here. So the Y is lower than the actual canvas. So the canvas is 500, so I've got to go lower than that. So I've got to do 450. This is a good reason to use your width variables instead of just making up numbers. Anyway, let's say no stroke here. Okay, so we've got frog clicker, and then let's put a little arrow in here. Um, so actually for the arrow, we're gonna have to know the direction. I didn't really think about this. Um, so let's just put a variable here. I'm just gonna call this next, and I'm gonna call this prev. Um, and so then I'll say direction here. And so then I'm going to draw a triangle going in whichever direction it should go in. And this is going to be a little tricky because I'm going to have to use the X, Y, and size to make the triangle match the button. I didn't really think about how hard a triangle would be when I was coming up with this. But anyway, fill is yellow. So if direction equals next, because the buttons are slightly different, if direction equals next, we need a triangle. So let's think about this. So if we have a circle, we need a triangle that's like here, 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 here. Okay, so, and then the X of the circle is here, the Y is here, and this is the size. I should probably just say next or oh, you know what I'll do? You know what's going to be easier? I'll just use some Unicode triangles. I don't really want to draw a triangle. So let's look up Unicode right triangle. Uh, Nah, it looks kind of bad. I can do a triangle. I'll figure it out. Okay, so we need a triangle. Um, let's say we're going to start at x minus, let's just use hard-coded numbers. So x minus 10 and y minus 10. Okay, so that will, so if this is xy, that'll put us here. So that's our first point. Then our second point will also be x minus 10, but now this is y plus 10. And then this point will be x plus 10 and just plain y. Okay, so x minus 10, y plus 10, x plus 10, and plain y. Okay, that's not a great triangle, but at least it exists. Let's put these points on different lines so I can see the whole thing. Okay. And you know what I can do? Okay, let's make this a little bit bigger. That's too big. Okay. Let's just do size over 2. That's probably good enough, right? Or is that going to be even bigger? Yeah, that's even bigger. Okay, we'll do size over 4. Okay. I don't know if this is gonna, okay, so if the direction equals next, then if direction equals prev, I'm gonna just copy this whole triangle and I'm just gonna reverse everything. So just swapping these pluses and minuses, I think this will be good enough to get me a triangle facing the other direction. There we go. Okay, that wasn't too bad. They're not really like centered. So let's just add plus, or yeah, okay. So let's just add a little bit. Let's say plus 2, 2, 2. Does that look okay? No, that looks worse. What about 3, 3, 3? That looks worse too. I'm just gonna deal with it not looking that great. It's good enough, whatever. Okay, now we want to just see if we clicked inside the circles. I'm also going to move the circle back a little bit. So for prev button X, I'm going to move this up to 600 so they're closer to each other. Maybe 620. Oop. Okay, maybe 580. Okay, so now we have to see if we're clicking inside the circles to change the slide. So drawing and detecting the collision are going to be very different things. So I'm going to collapse my button function, and I'm going to add a new function, mouse pressed. And basically what I'm going to do is check if I'm clicking on one of my buttons, and if I am, I'm going to change the slide. So let's start with the next button. So what we need to know essentially is we know where this next button is. We know the XY position and we know the size, and we just have to know if the mouse is inside here or if it's outside here. So we learned this a couple weeks ago. All I have to do is take the radius of this circle and check the distance between my mouse over here and the middle of my circle. And if this radius is, or if this distance is smaller than the radius r, then the mouse is somewhere inside the circle. If it's not, then it's not. So we've already gone over this in a previous lesson, but we're just going to review here. So I'm going to say variable d for distance is dist between mouse x, mouse y, and button next button x, button y. So that gives me the distance between the mouse and the next button. If d is less than button size divided by 2, so I'm getting the radius, not the diameter, then we're going to increase the current slide. So say current slide plus equals, or just say plus plus because we're just going up by 1. Okay, so now we can click through our slides. One problem is that we can go too far. So we have to check that there's slides left. So we have to say if current slide is less than, and let's make a variable for total slides in case we want to change the number of slides. So I'm going to say variable total slides equals 4. That way, if I add more slides in the future, I don't have to dig through my code to find this part right here. So we'll call this total slides. Okay, so now we won't go past the last slide. Okay, so now we have to go back. So we're going to do almost the exact same thing to go back. So I'm going to reset d. I'm going to say d equals distance. And then I'm just going to copy this because it's almost the same thing. The only thing that's different is this next button is our prev button x. Everything else is the same because the buttons are the same size and have the same y value. And I can use the same variable, I'm just reassigning it. So I'm getting this distance here, but then I'm just gonna reassign it right here. There's no reason I can't do that. So now distance is, if distance is still less than button size divided by 2, we're gonna say current slide minus minus. Okay, so now I have the same problem where if I click on my previous slide, but I don't have slides before it, I get in trouble. So what I need to check is if current slide is greater than 0. So if it's at least 1, then we can go back to 0. Or sorry, we started at 1. So if it's greater than 1, then we can go back to 1. If it's not greater than 1, then we don't have anywhere to go back to, so we can't go back. So now I can click on this button and nothing happens. And I can also click on the next button and I move to the next slide. So there we go. We have a really basic slideshow. I could also set this up with key presses. So I could, add a key press and say if the key is, right or the key is left, move the slides as well. We're just going to stick with this for now just to save time. But this is basically the final project pitch template. You guys can, make a copy of this and update it to have your own content. If you want to build it from scratch, obviously you're welcome to do that. But I'll put a link to this in the voice chat. And so for this one, this is a good review of some of the stuff that we've already learned. But for the project, for the proposal itself, don't worry about creating your own version of it. You can just duplicate this project. So, if you go to that link and go to File and click Duplicate, you can create your own version of the project, and then you'll be able to, um, you know, replace the graphics and the text with your idea for the final project. So obviously you have to come up with an idea for the final project first. And if you have questions, if you're not sure what to do and you want to discuss different options, we can talk about that. Um, but if you already have an idea for what you want to do, you can go ahead and just start filling this in. So this project is a separate assignment. It's not the final project. The final project obviously is like making the sketch that you're describing in here. So, I could make a frog clicker demo in our next class if that's something that you guys would want to see. But I don't need to if we want to just we have 2 more classes left, which we can just use for workshop time for the final project um, if that's preferable. But anyway, let's see. I'm going to save this. I'm going to stop the recording here, and then let me know if you guys have any questions.